All right, welcome everybody to the Alyosha Society, where we are pursuing truth and beauty and goodness through great literature. I've been telling you guys all along through every video in this book that I had a special guest coming for video number 6. And indeed, he is a special guest. He's not only a special guy, he's not only a wonderful guy, he's not only a cool guy, he happens to be my son, Isaac Etter. Welcome, Isaac. Glad that you could join us for this discussion.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, and I'm not just having Isaac here because he's my son. It just so happens that Isaac has done a tremendous amount of reading, studying, thinking, public speaking. He's been involved in activism. He's been involved in a whole lot of things that are connected to the issue of race and race in America. So, Isaac, how you feeling, man?
Feeling good. Feeling like this is going to be a fun conversation.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I've been looking forward to it. And just to tell you, we haven't had a big chance to talk about it. Where we did a big, huge historical overview from the 3 amendments to the Constitution. That's where we started. Was the 3 amendments to the Constitution, which ended slavery, citizenship, and the right to vote. And then we talked a lot about how none of the benefits of those things really happened for former slaves. We talked a lot about poll taxes and violence and how those former slaves really did not have the rights afforded to them by the United States Constitution. We talked a lot about Jim Crow laws and the two sort of major issues involving the government. We talked about the Supreme Court case, Brown versus the Board of Education. And then we talked about Lyndon B. Johnson signing the 1964 Civil Rights Act. We also talked about the fact that integration of the public schools did not take place overnight, and it still took place over a long period of time. And here we are in 2023, and not really exactly where we would all hope that we would be. So that's what we've done. So the context of this is Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham jail and his famous speech. So they've already read the speech. They've listened to the speech at least once. They've read Letter from Birmingham Jail, and we talked about his philosophy of nonviolent protest. So before we get to, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is talk about, where are things today and where might we be headed? But do you mind commenting first, Isaac, on the, 1968, the year of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, where, what's your perspective of the historical overview of where things have gone from that time till now? And while you're talking, I just realized I'm going to have to grab a charger because I'm a little bit low here. So I'm going to let you go ahead and just start talking to our students, and I'll be right in.
No problem. Yeah, I think when we think about starting at 1968, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. was definitely a pretty telling time in America. So I would say that we've made significant progress since then. I think some of the areas where we haven't seen progress is usually in mindset and ideology, maybe. And so we might see laws change, we might see institutions change, policy change, which are all really powerful things. But I think one of the areas that we're still seeing a pretty significant lack of change is in really like the hearts and minds of people. And when the hearts and minds of people aren't really changed and racism isn't kind of eradicated from the inside out, what we see is that when those people get into positions of power at organizations, in different institutions, they can make, decisions based around bias and things like that. And so I would say that's one of the biggest things that we see today. We see a lot less outright like lynching and things like that, But we do see a lot of discrimination, a lot of bias, a lot of stereotyping, which are all very, I think, typical things of a culture and a society. But I think they're at least exaggerated for Black people in America because of the history of racism. And because, 1968 isn't that long ago, there's still so many people alive that are living today that have raised children around the ideology that they believed in the 1960s. And then those children are raising children to believe some of the same things. And now we know young people are a little bit different. Young people have been a little bit more liberal than most, but we still see the ideology passing down. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we see currently today.
That's helpful. Yeah, that's very helpful. Yeah, and my wife, your mother, of course, frequently tells the story of how now, and just so that we clarify for the audience, as of the making of this video, it's 2023. So you may be watching this video out in the future and something may have happened, but it's currently March of 2023. And my wife tells the story of how when you turned 16 and got your license, we had to have certain conversations, and the three of us had to work through things that we did not have to work through with our white children when it comes to how to behave when it comes to you as a Black man dealing with law enforcement. And that brings me to my next question. So I'm an old guy now. I'm in my mid 50s. So I've kind of witnessed where things have gone over a half a century, pretty long time. And it seems like over the last decade, maybe 5 to 10 years, but let's just make it safe and say the last decade, there seems to be an increase in intensity. Not that the issues weren't always there, but what I mean, the reason I brought up law enforcement is because I wonder, it seems that a lot of the issues do revolve around the issue of the relationship of the Black community with law enforcement. But what are your thoughts on why there seems to be this sort of increase in the intensity of tensions in the last decade?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of it is just like pendulum switching,
Uh,
right? Because you think about like Martin Luther King time period, Malcolm X time period, there was a lot of uprise then. And then both of those people were assassinated. And when something I think traumatic like that happens, it kind of creates a different effect. You know what I mean? The children of those people, the community around those people, though they may still believe the same thing, intensity kind of dies out. And not to say that it all died out. There were certainly people who were still doing fantastic and miraculous things. But certainly we can see that there wasn't as big of a movement post those assassinations. And so how I come to kind of think about the last 10 years is really that there is a new generation of young people. There's a vocal generation of young people. It's also one of the most mixed groups of young people caring about these issues. And so now, I think mainly because of the internet, there's both white, Black, Hispanic, Latino, Asian people who all tend to care about this issue of racism, especially towards the Black community. And I think in the last 10 years, those people have kind of found a voice together. And that has led to a kind of more uprising. I also think that what we're dealing with is like we're dealing with the grandkids, some grandkids and some great grandkids of people who experienced some pretty rough things.
oh,
You know
that's
what I mean?
wow.
Yeah, like Chris Rock, who was a little bit older, he talks about the story of his mother having to go to the veterinarian to get her teeth cleaned.
Hmm.
And so you got to think about that. If he lived that, then his kids,
He's basically my age.
yeah, exactly. And so his kids are my age, and
Yeah.
they're on the streets, and they're hearing these stories. So a lot of Black kids, I think, especially who we see today, have grown up with all these stories. They've grown up with all
Hmm.
these stories they've been heard. Granddad and grandmom are telling them all these stories. Their parents are telling them all these stories. And so it would make sense to me that those young people, because they're young and they're vibrant and they have that passion, would kind of spur up action. And I think that's what we're seeing over the last 10 years is people who are tired of that history being ignored. When we
Mm,
say that kind of racism is gone, and we think about, the world that we're living in now, which is definitely more like less racist than ever before, right? In terms of policy and organizations, like Black people can get hired places and all those things. I think it can probably frustrate some of those grandkids when they think about their grandparents who may still be alive having to go to the vet to get their teeth cleaned while we're living in a world that's trying to market as if that never happened or if that happened decades and decades ago,
ooh,
or centuries ago. And so I think there's a lot of people who feel like maybe that none of the wrongs have been fully righted. Um,
yeah.
and so I think that a lot of that has led to some of the things over the last 10 years. And then
Mm.
especially like the highlight on police brutality has also only added to it.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. I think that last thing you said there is super helpful when it comes to, I mean, me just realizing that in my youngest years, there would have still been um sort of a lingering over of
Yeah.
Jim Crow. I mean, it's hard to even get. So I think that's a great point that the
Exactly.
history we tell, uh, we tend to tell it in such a way that it's like, well, that, that was hundreds of years ago, but no, it might have
Exactly.
been last week. Um,
Yeah.
well, that brings me really to the kind of the golden question here. And one of the reasons I wanted to do MLK was there's a lot of reasons. First of all, and you know this because you're a rhetorician, you're a practicer
Yeah.
of rhetoric. His rhetoric is off the charts. I mean, even if we were doing something totally different, I would use him as an example of
Yeah.
effective and powerful rhetoric. Uh, but the other reason is to discuss, as you know, this is a dialectic course. I bring up issues, I kind of throw the meat out there in the middle and encourage students to just devour it, debate it, discuss it. And so his emphasis was, as we all know, nonviolent protest, and he stuck by that. We have also talked about civil disobedience
Yeah.
and how MLK talked about how the means of achieving the end have to be as pure as the end itself. And there's so many amazing quotes from him. But we also talk, about why, understanding why some folks would reject that
Yeah.
and go the violent route or some other route that maybe not even physical violence, maybe that. I guess what I'm wondering is just an honest, just a raw, honest answer to, is there hope? Some activists today might dismiss Martin Luther King as too passive. You
Right.
know, it's time, that we leave that behind. Do you think there's still hope for his nonviolent approach to social justice?
Yeah. Yeah, to kind of just like base answer, yes. But then I also would say that, like, by and large, I think most activism is non-violent. I think in George Floyd, we heard about a lot of violence because it's what was going on in terms of a couple major cities.
Yeah.
Um, but I do think that by and large, a lot of activism is nonviolent, and a lot of activism nowadays is not even protesting. You know what I mean? There's lobbyers, there's people who are building nonprofit organizations. And so
Right.
activism today is actually probably the most nonviolent it's ever been. Now, in another regard, I will say that we are probably verging on probably the most violent time period of mixed opinions. So activism from all extremes. And so uh, I'm much more scared of violence occurring because of a lot of people really passionate about mixed views. So whether that be conservative, liberal, libertarian, socialist, capitalist, I'm actually much more scared that that mix together will become nonviolent will become
Mm,
violent than that just the fight for racial justice will become violent. Just because, over the last decade, that we have seen different protests, different burnings happen, and those have been, what they are. By and large, these movements have been non protesting, non-violent. They've mostly happened in rooms and in meetings and in policy. Um, but I do think we can all say, whether it's the Proud Boys, marching on capitals with guns to not wear masks, or
mm,
whether it's Black Lives Matter people burning down a police station, what we're actually seeing now is that there's a lot of extremes on either side that are resorting to violence, which is
mm,
also very historical. White people, when they were mad at their governments, would burn Black communities down. And
mm.
so we've always seen historically that extremes result to violence. And I do think that we're verging more towards activism in general on all spectrums
Mm.
being a little bit violent than just one group.
That is a fantastic point. So what part of what you're saying, it seems, is out of this massive amount of work that's done in social justice, there is
Yeah,
a pretty teeny, minuscule slither of it that ends up getting the news that
yeah,
that
exactly.
that happens to have a violent element to it. And then I think you're right. Sometimes the folks who have the genuine protest are not
Yeah,
are not even in favor of whatever some of those. And I think that's a great point, Isaac. And students, I hope you really picked up on that. Uh, because it goes both ways. Nobody wants to be defined by the most radical element of their position. I would call myself a little bit on the conservative side when it comes to my theology and my politics, but I certainly don't want to be defined by people who might be labeled much more radical in that
yeah.
direction. I don't want to associate myself with them. That's awesome, man. That's really good feedback. Well, we'll wrap up with this final question. Again, to remind our viewers, it's March 2023. Where do you see things going? I mean, I think I know where you would hope things go. You can certainly comment on that too. But any major issues or areas where you see things headed moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, not maybe not, don't have like an exact answer, but I think we're probably heading towards a time of a lot of structural change in terms of system. It seems to me that like governments, organizations, policy, there's a big pendulum switch in that direction. And I think that's going to have some profound impacts in positive and negative ways. There are going to be people who are going to be very opposed to what they might, deem as, too extreme policies for corporations or, government. And then there's going to be people who think it's not enough, right? But I do think that what we'll mostly see over the next decade is a lot less protesting, unless there were to be some other major event. But I think we'll see a lot more debate, fighting back and forth about progressive policy and progressive hiring, progressive law, and also progressive politicians, which should all be a really interesting time for our country.
That's great. Well, we can hope, we can pray, and we can all do whatever it is we're supposed to do or say or not do or not say. That's awesome. Well, Isaac, I think I've told you this many times. I'm very proud of you. Very
Thank
proud
you.
of the young man you've turned into. Very proud of your passion and the work that you've done, not only in activism as it relates to class issues or race issues, but also in the area of adoption. And I'll give you just a moment here to speak to the crowd about what you do, and if they ever have any needs in that area, they'd know where to go.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I run a startup called Identity, and what we are doing is just reimagining adoption and foster care education. We build resources, and we have a community that supports adoptive and foster parents through the journey. And so, if that's ever of interest, you can always go to identitylearning.co, co. and message me, and we can talk, and we can see. We have workbooks, guides, and then we also have the online community with resources.
It's good stuff, guys. It's good stuff. This guy knows what he's talking about. He's a huge blessing. Thanks, Isaac. I know you're a busy guy. I appreciate you taking time to hang
I
out with
appreciate
us.
it. This is great. Thanks for having me.
Students, go ahead then. If you're taking the course, I believe the next book we're doing is Mere Christianity. If you're just doing this as a one-off, then thanks for hanging out with us. But I think the next one we're moving into is C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. So be sure you're ready for that. Blessings, friends.